Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the SKNIS Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
Welcome to InFocus. I'm Ian Richards, a weekly program where we zoom in on what's happening within and throughout the government, your government. Well, St. Kitts and Nevis enjoys a very stable labor environment with industrial peace between the tripartite partners, that is, employers, employees, and government. Joining us today from the Ministry of Employment and Labor are the Commissioner of Labor, Shernell James, and the Head of the Occupational Safety and Health Environment Unit, Junique Eddy. Our discussion will focus on efforts to make the work environment safe for employers, employees, and, where applicable, customers, and the ongoing review of the minimum wage, and much more. Stay with us as we delve into your business, your government. Thank you for staying with us and allow me to welcome our guests today, as we mentioned before, from the Ministry of Employment and Labor, Ms. James, who is the Commissioner, and Mr. Eddy, who is a unit head with responsibility for safety and health and environment. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having us.
Right. Let's start with you, Ms. James, in the sense of the primary function of the Ministry of Employment and Labor. What is that?
The Ministry of Employment and Labor is a labor administrative functioning ministry, whereby we look at policy, legislation, we look at a number of issues pertaining to the world of work that is governed by government, whereby we have a balance between workers and employers, and we have in the middle ground. For example, in one of the issues we will look at conciliation and mediation. If there's an issue whereby employers and workers cannot come to a common ground, the Ministry of Employment and Labor comes into being as the adjudicator or mediator in terms of all of this, so that we can help to create a stable and industrial climate, and there is harmony or a harmonious work environment for all parties, ensuring that at all times there is decent work.
Now, the ministry, most persons will be familiar with it as the Department of Labor.
Yes.
It was rebranded the Ministry of Employment and Labor.
Mm-hmm.
When was this done? And tell us why.
This was done last year around November, where we upgraded from a department to a ministry, and we were given the extra portfolio of employment because it's appropriate time for this to happen. The ILO over the years has been telling us it's time to move away from being a department to be doing the same, to upgrading like all the other ministries of labor throughout the region to a ministry whereby it is headed by a permanent secretary who handles all of the administrative functionary of the ministry, and the technical side is handled by the labor commissioner and her team, or his or her team, in terms of what we do. We carry out a series of functions. There's employment, there is occupational safety and health, there is the international side where we as members of the ILO report to ILO on all matters that we are doing. There is conciliation and media, there's policy, there's recommending based upon the administrative records and data we will get at the Department of Labor, looking at it, advising the Minister of Labor, advising the Cabinet on the direction of labor policy and labor legislation. And so basically that is what we would do in a nutshell.
And just for the benefit of the public, ILO stands for?
The International Labour Organization, of which we became a member in 1996.
Right. Okay, so how would you say the operations, and Mr. Eddie, feel free to jump in as well too, the operations has changed from, as you switch from a department to a ministry?
We have, as we switch from a department to a ministry, we now have an extra function in the aspect of employment. We are now charged with ensuring that we take into consideration all aspects of employment, ensuring that we have a trainable workforce, ensuring that we can put more people out there to work. And so we look at not only females, we look at youth employment, because we realize that it is not just a trend in St. Kitts and Nevis, that there is an issue with a number of youths who are coming out of the world of school and are unable to transition from school to the world of work. And so one of our roles is to ensure that we find employment for those young people who are transitioning, whether it be through internships, which will transition them from the world of school to the world of work, or we find them employment or train them with other partners in the world of work, for example, the Ministry of Education, employers and workers, to ensure that we have a workforce that is filled with a balance of persons, in not just persons who are of a certain age category, but we are looking at those who are coming out of school until you retire and claim Social Security.
Mr. Eddie?
Yes, I think piggybacking on Mrs. James' comment, I think we are also looking at the levels of skills that we are providing for our youths. I think most of what we've been accustomed to have been somewhat, we follow a trend where most persons, they go to college, they come out of high school, they look at the administrative aspect of working, they look at the office jobs, the jobs that you tend to look maybe more professional in your suit and your tie. But we have realized that even in COVID, that skilled persons were one of the most high beneficiaries in terms of persons who were able to, live with COVID and live without COVID. So we want to make sure that in this new direction that we are going, we are pushing for skilled persons coming out of the school levels, so that in the event that any other pandemic was to hit our shores, we are prepared and not just bounded by just the typical level of works that we would have been accustomed to, but we are then adventuring into new scales of skilled work.
And so, well, either of you can answer. This sounds like it would involve a number of institutions partnering, because of course, as you mentioned, there has to be training. And then when you look at the curriculum development as well, I'm sure that there are some adjustments that are going to be needed there.
Over the years, we have been working with a number of institutions, for example, the National NSDP, the CFBC, and a number of an AVEC, to ensure that we can make a meaningful contribution in terms of those students who are being put out of these institutions. We would have done training for a number of them, and that's one of the things that we do as part of our mandate, is to not only just train the workforce, but to ensure that once you get into the workforce, that you are a person who is employable but is able to maintain your job. And so the Department of Labor would have not only we have partnered with the Ministry of Social Development, where we would have trained a number of their clients to ensure that we help them to get back into the world of work. We would have trained students from CFPC, and we would have trained persons through the national training skills as well.
So the facilities are drawn from those agencies, or is it being done in-house by persons from the Department of Labor?
The Department of Labor. And employers do invite us in as well to, to do training for their workforce as well. Just last week we did a number of training within the
tertiary schools,
secondary schools, as well as we would have gone into a number of businesses who would have invited us to do some training for their staff.
Okay. Mr. Eddie, your focus at the department primarily is occupational safety and health. And of course, St. Kitts and Nevis would have participated with the rest of the world on April 28th in observing World Day for Safety and Health. Tell us what that observance basically is about.
Okay, so World Day for Safety and Health, it is celebrated annually. It's celebrated on the 28th of April, as you would have said, and it is to promote the prevention of occupational accidents and diseases globally. Now, you would have seen a clip stating the theme for this year's celebration or commemoration, which was a safe and healthy working environment as a fundamental principle and right at work. So the importance of this observance is the fact that, the annual World Day for Safety and Health, it promotes, as we said, it promotes the prevention of occupational accidents and diseases globally. It is an awareness-raising campaign intended to focus international attention on the magnitude of the problem and on how promoting and creating a safety and health culture can help reduce the number of work-related deaths and injuries.
An awareness-related campaign. So
Right.
what activities took place to help to raise the awareness of persons here in St. Kitts and Nevis?
Well, as the commissioner would have said, we continue because we would have never really stopped. There were some areas where we would have heightened, and then we would have concentrated on this week's activities, which would have been last week. We would have done a number of in-house activities. We started with a staff development retreat because we feel that in order to send a message out there, we first have to start with ourselves. So we had a staff development retreat where the officers of the Ministry of Employment and Labor would have gathered at Eco Park, and we had a nice day where we let our hair down, as we would normally say in our colloquial terms. We allowed our staff members to feel comfortable. We allowed them to vent at some aspects of the laws which maybe might hinder us or advance us in certain aspects. We then continued this level of activities by worshiping together at the Antioch Baptist Church. We continued by our education awareness campaigns, where we would have ventured, as the commissioner would have said, we would have ventured into a number of high schools. And the reason for venturing into the high schools, the aspect of it, what we were thinking was to get those persons or those students who are on the brink of choosing a career, the fourth farmers in particular, because we understand that the fifth farmers would have been focusing on their exams. So we didn't really want to take them away from that. We then targeted some of the fourth farm students of the different schools. We basically looked at educating them about the same thing that we would have mentioned, skilled work, where we are looking for them to think outside of the box. I think we have enough persons, for the office duties per se. And we are now looking at, getting our younger population to open up their minds and, to venture into different aspects of work, so that at the end of the day, we would have a better balance of, workers throughout the world of work, rather than having a duplicate of one specific sector. We are looking at ensuring that persons are filled with enough knowledge, so that if they want to venture into a different level of employment, they can do so with enough education of what that sector would bring based on the world of work.
And we also look at informing them about safety and health. We want to create a culture of prevention. How do you do that? You start from that. You start from that level, So you continuously, by giving them the information, encouraging them to think safely, act safely, in order for us to ensure that there is a culture of prevention. We don't want to be out in fires. We want to ensure that there is no fires that are being taking place, so that one of the reasons in going to the school is to teach them from that level to think safely and do things in a safe manner. We are hoping that we can take it further. We can go into the primary school, because that is where you, as you grow along, you develop certain skill sets and certain patterns, and we are hoping that we can take it further down into the primary schools to teach that level of prevention.
And that's important, because in St. Kitts and Nevis, there's a bit of a culture where, persons are encouraged not necessarily to speak out when certain things happen. In the workplace, like, oh, I don't want to get in any trouble. Or, that doesn't really concern my section, so I don't do anything. So helping to have these conversations at a younger age would certainly help to transform the mindset as they move forward into the world of work.
Yes.
Right. And what would you say, based on the activities that you covered, what would you say stood out to you most?
Well, for my part, I think the visit to the schools was a real eye-opener, because we were able to tap into their knowledge base. Now, we went with the intention to teach, but it's also one of the rare occasions where you get to learn from the younger population. You get to learn what are they interested in, instead of just pushing a directive on them, instead of pushing something down their throat. We allow them to speak, we allow them to give us, some indications of what they are seeing in the world of work themselves, because we can't be blindsided by the fact that they are living in the same world that we are. So even though we are a bit older, they have been exposed to a lot of different aspects. Some of the students would have said that they probably have a full-blown business by now, in the sense that some of them who do hair, some of them who do nails, of that sort. So we now came across an aspect where they were basically educating us from the informal sector per se, because we know this is something that they probably wouldn't need a business place. Some of them use the households, the landing areas, the veranda areas, the backyards, and things of that sort. So I think it was an eye-opener for me to understand that they are thinking, they are already on the verge of choosing some level of career aside of their career which they would want to tap into. And I think, being the police of the laws, it warms my heart to see that they are already awaiting our education, or awaiting the knowledge that we would bestow upon them, so that when they are ready to now operate a full business now, when they get a little older, they already have the basic principles and rights of work, things that would lead them into establishing a successful business, and therefore the world of work only gets better.
Ms. James, for you, any standouts? I know, of course, besides what Mr. Eddie would have said in terms of the educational institutions, that there were some visitations to businesses. I would say those who were identified as having the best practice as it relates to ensuring that there is occupational safety and health. Right. What stood out for you?
What stood out basically is that the team carry out on a daily basis inspections of these workplaces, and the measures that are recommended by the Department of Labor, it is heartening to see that a number of these employers would take into consideration the recommendation, and some of them would quickly put into place the measures necessary to ensure that their workplace are safe and healthy. Some would give problems, but it was very heartening to see a number of these employers welcoming the opportunity to upgrade and to ensure that their workplace is considered to be a decent workplace, and that their workers are considered and are measured and are put in a position that they can produce in an environment that ensures their safety and health is paramount.
And there were some videos I produced. Mr. Eddie, just quickly before we take a break, let persons know where they can find those videos online.
Well, we would have shared them from our ministry's page, that is the Ministry of Employment and Labor, that is on Facebook. There are other social media platforms which I would mention a little later as I would get confirmation from our public relations officer. But on Facebook, it's saying it's Nevis Employment, Ministry of Employment and Labor, and you could find the videos, some of the videos that we would have shared, basically with the activities, the week of activities which we would have celebrated last week.
And so we encourage the public to go ahead and take a look at those videos as mentioned there on the Facebook page of the Ministry of Employment and Labor. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back to discuss International Labor Day. Stay with us. Welcome back to InFocus. We continue our discussion with Commissioner of Labor, Srinil James, and the head of the Occupational Safety and Health Unit and Environment, Mr. Janique Eddy. Now, of course, on May 1st, we saw last year being filled with a few persons, more than a few persons, hundreds of persons, in fact, who would have celebrated International Labor Day, which commonly is known here in St. Kitts and Nevis as Labor Day. You know, it essentially is something that is done annually throughout the world, as the graphic would have shown for those who are watching us online or watching us on ZZ TV. 80 countries, that certainly is a lot. Why International Labor Day? Why is it so important?
It's a day set aside to celebrate workers. It is a time where you raise awareness of the rights of workers as people who are in a working environment, and to ensure that they are not exploited but protected. And it also serves as a reminder of the important roles workers play in terms of your development as a country and your economy. And so it is set aside to celebrate workers. It doesn't matter if you are a drain cleaner or a doctor, we all are considered workers, and it is a time set aside to celebrate what we do, our participation in the world of work.
Mr. Eddy, anything you'd care to add to that?
Yes, the fact that as a young person growing up, I would have been, a part of watching these festivities, not really maybe understanding some of the levels of what the day really means until we get to that working level where we are now a part of companies, a part of establishments. And now it comes to light that, the importance of the day, which is why it's a holiday. I mean, some persons might feel like it's a holiday for you to just, go to the beach or somewhat of that sort. But as the commissioner would have said, it's really to highlight the importance of workers. The highlight, why is it such an important thing to ensure that your workforce is happy? There are different aspects of why what can lead to a happy workforce. But I think just the right to march, the right to associate, the right for workers just to come together and celebrate as one. I think that is a good celebration, and we should take more strength of it, more hold of it. I think our workers need to understand how important we are. Without our work, the employers cannot live, the businesses cannot strive. So I think as we go on, we should try to get more awareness as to the day, and hopefully have everyone who is working coming out rather than just a selected few, some who feels that, it is my day. We want all workers to feel, for that day, entitled that, we have the right to associate together as a workforce.
The important partners in labor, industrial relations would be, as we mentioned earlier in the opening, the employers, employees, and government. Together they form a tripartite committee. And of course, St. Kitts and Nevis has established its tripartite committee as well to Ms. James. Tell us a bit about the committee and what its role is.
When we became a member of the ILO in 1996, we as you know, the ILO is tripartite in its structure. It's the only UN organization that is tripartite in structure. And so when we became a member, we put together based upon Convention 144, tripartite consultation, which deals with social dialogue. We had a committee. It was ad hoc. It was not institutionalized. And in 2013, in accordance with the Protection of Employment Amendment Act, the National Tripartite Committee on Labor Standards was established. It was established to ensure that we, as workers and employers, we come together to ensure that we participate in any aspect of the world of work, that it is not just one-sided, but everyone has a part to play to ensuring that there is industrial peace and harmony. And so we would have looked at conventions that we would recommend for government to ratify. We would have looked at planning simple World Day for Safety and Health, because it as an ILO activity, it should involve just not government, but all the workers and employers as well. Looking at legislation and policy, we would have in 2012, we would have established a national policy on HIV, AIDS, and other chronic diseases. That was one of our major highlights before we became an institution itself that is governed by law. And so we also looked at the establishment of a labor code for St. Kitts and Nevis. And basically, under the structure, we are expected to meet 4 times a year, but based upon the need that may arise within the world of work, we can meet as frequently or infrequently as that matter. But as the structure would have put under the Act, we are expected to at least meet 4 times a year.
Mr. Ely, give us a brief rundown in terms of, not necessarily names, but the representation. Of course, as we mentioned, there are partners from government, members from government, members from management, and also members from employees as well. So I imagine that would be the unions. Give us a rundown.
Right. So there are a number of institutions that we tend to partner with when we are doing any form of awareness campaigns, education campaigns. As Ms. James would have mentioned, the tripartite allows for government, Chamber of Industry and Commerce, who represents the employers, and the union, which represents workers. Outside of this, we meet with different establishments where we would, as you said earlier, we look for best practices, and we highlight those best practices so that we could use them as a guiding establishment. We look to reward establishments that give us high compliance. We, as the commissioner would have said, we tend to get a little pushback every now and then from, employers who tend to challenge some of what we are, trying to introduce or trying to recommend. We, under the Labour Code, as Ms. James would have said as well, we are hoping to see some level of legislation to support what we are saying in the world of work. So I think there is the notion that sometimes there is all back and no bite. So this Labour Code, we are hoping to see some level of legislations to provide us with the level of support that we would need. So when we are acting on behalf of the government, for example, and providing recommendations to these establishments, in order for them to provide a better working environment, we are hoping that the Labour Code would give us that level of remit. So when we are pointing fingers, we can use these as the policing document as for the guidance of these situations. All right.
Ms. James, briefly give us an idea in terms of the representation of the tripartite committee. How are the numbers working now?
In accordance with the law, it's 12. Government has 6 representatives. The employers has 3, and the workers have 3. Now, in accordance with the ILO Constitution, it is the most represented organization that is considered when we are looking in terms of who will formulate part of the tripartite constituency. And so the most represented employer organization is the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and the most represented in terms of overall what they provide to their members is the St. Kitts Nevis Trades and Labor Union. And so therefore the St. Kitts Nevis Trades and Labor Union has 3 members. The St. Kitts Nevis Chamber of Industry and of Commerce has 3 members, and these are recommended by their institution and are appointed by the Governor General, as well as the 6 that represent government. And it's not just the Labor Department, because we looked at the world of work involves education, social security. You know, you start with education, you into the world of work, and you ended up in social security. So these are key government institutions and ministries. Ministry of Legal Affairs, because you have to be able to have that aspect of being guided by a legal counsel in whatever you do. And so every member of the tripartite constituent has a legal counsel, whether they are appointed to the committee or they come in when is necessary. And so you will also need a component of gender. And in terms of government, we look at Nevis as well, because it's not just St. Kitts, it's St. Kitts and Nevis. So there are members who are part of the tripartite constituents who are from Nevis as well.
So you refer to the Labor Code. Mr. Eddie referred to the Labor Code. Essentially, tell the public what is the Labor Code, because I recall initially there was a movement to establish it. It used to operate sort of ad hoc, as you mentioned earlier, but it was formally established, at least the efforts to formalize it back in 2018. So tell us about the Labor Code.
A Labor Code is basically a codification of your labor legislation. And so as it is right now, we have a number of labor legislation on the book, but they're not codified into one document. If you need to find the Protection of Employment Act is chapter 1927. If you need to find the minimum wage, labor minimum wage, it is I think it's 19 point. So they're not in one series. They are different, and they are different pieces of legislation on the book. And so therefore a amalgamation of all the labor legislation into one document considered to be a labor code. So when you ask for the labor code and you pick it up, it will all legislation associated with labor and work and issues of that nature. And so we would have had several labor codes, but our last labor code came into being draft. Let us look at it as draft, because it's not a code as yet. It's a draft code. And so it was done by Sir Clare Roberts of Antigua in tripartite consultation with all of the key stakeholders in the world of work. We would have had one consultation, and then COVID came, and so the code was put aside until COVID was over. And so we're back at the table. We would have met in February, the members of the tripartite constituent, to review the code as it is, the draft code, and to determine ensuring that this code come into being, whether by the end of the year or early next year, and what would formulate part of the code. And so right now we are, each constituent are back reviewing the legislation, the draft code, making suggestions as per what we are going to include under this document to ensure that at least by December 31st, if it is possible, that we have a labor code for St. Kitts and Nevis that will include aspects of occupational safety and health, which is important because as presently the legislation that governs that comes under the Factories Act, but it looked at work being done in factories, work being done in agriculture, and it doesn't take into consideration that in a modern world of work there are issues like ergonomics, there are office workers, there are all types of workers. So we are hoping that we would have at least occupational safety and health legislation that covers all workers and not just one particular area or sector.
The world of work definitely has changed. And so when you said December 31st, so have the draft probably approved, you're speaking about this year.
The draft as it is right now, we are going back through the draft.
Right.
Okay, because we had determined in 2008 that we were going to look at it as first amalgamating all of the labor legislation into one document, and then secondly we would add additional legislation. So we are hoping that instead of having two phases, we will have just one phase where we will look at the amalgamated legislation and introduction of new legislation under the code that will cover everyone and would make it a modern code that will govern the world of work.
Right, so the timeline, you said it's this December 31st, that's this year.
We are hoping we can get it done by December 31st.
Okay.
But if it goes on, we are hoping that it doesn't go beyond the second quarter of 2024. But we are hoping and we are pushing to ensure that we have at least a labor code by December 31st.
The government, of course, has been focused on a review of the minimum wage here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the drumbeat has been building. That is something I'd like to speak to you about next, but we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back with more in Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome back to In Focus. We continue our discussions with officials from the Ministry of Employment and Labor, Shernell James, who is the Commissioner, and Junique Eddy, who is responsible for occupational safety and health, the environment here in St. Kitts and Nevis as it relates to work. Ms. James, minimum wage review.
Yeah.
What role does the department have to play in that regard?
The department is the coordinating agency. In accordance with the Labor Minimum Wage Act, an advisory committee is appointed by the Minister of Labor. And at presently, we have a minimum wage advisory committee that was put together and is presently reviewing the minimum wage. As you know, we would have had a minimum wage in 2014, and then there was a committee that was put in place in 2018, and they came to the conclusion that it was not appropriate for a new minimum wage at that time. And so this present committee is charged in reviewing based upon all the prevailing circumstances, including COVID and including inflation, including the CPI and issues of that nature, to come up with a new minimum wage for the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Of course, the minimum wage is $9 an hour. It currently stands.
At presently, it's $9 an hour.
Right. And so you said the review. Give us a sense of like what it entails. What exactly is taking place during the review itself?
The review takes into consideration that this committee is tripartite plus in nature: government, workers, employers, and civil society. And so the committee would have met. Each entity that is part of the minimum wage advisory committee presents to the committee a position paper. And it is based on data. What is the inflation rate, what is the unemployment rate, what is the CPI, and all of these things. And so based upon that, each entity would present a position paper, and they would make a recommendation as per what they think the minimum wage should be, based upon the data that they would have put together, they would have looked at and determined they looked at it and determined what their rate would be. It is the committee's decision to review all of these positions, determined at the end of it if we should have an increase or if there should not be an increase, and then present our findings to the Minister of Labour, who then takes it to her cabinet colleague to review.
Mr. Eddie, I imagine that during some of the engagements that you would have had during the ASH week, of course, that there are some persons who would have weighed in on that, and some employees and maybe some employers too. What feedback did you get?
Well, I think being the somewhat police on the ground when it's regarding to the world of work, we get these questions ever so often. I think even I've just said some workers from the employee standpoint, they would ask for a raise of pay, for example. But we also have to look at it from the employer side. What about, does a raise of pay come with more duties? So are your duties balanced with your pay scale and your pay region? So all of this we tend to see while we're doing our inspections. We get the questions all the time, as you said, from employers level. They would tend to ask how their finances would look if they were to raise, the wages of one or two of their workers, being in nature that the minimum wage are only supposed to be for a certain level of persons, because we wouldn't expect, certain persons who are trained, certified persons to be looking at a minimum wage level of their wages. However, we have seen that because there are no at this time, there are no wage scales. We have seen that persons just, inherit that, this job, for example, we will pay them minimum wage, $9 an hour. However, they are trained, they are certified, they are competent persons, but the position that they are in tend to give them the aspect of maybe just collecting a minimum wage. So we on the ground, we hear it a lot, and as you could ask the commissioner right here, we bring back every level of complaint, any recommendations that they would have, because as we try to do, we ask for solutions to every problem. If not every problem, as much solutions as possible for every problem that we have seen. So the being in the world of work, we continue to field these questions, and we continue to give the realest answers that we can. And as Ms. James said, once we keep working on this minimum wage, advisory we would then be geared towards a better understanding of what we can do, because it's all good to say that we need a raise in pay. But as we said, we have to look at the world of work. We have to look at what is happening globally and internationally before we just go with whatever is going on.
And just quickly, the wage scales that you mentioned, that will be set by the companies themselves, because they are the ones that have to deal with the bills.
Right.
And it is based upon market forces, what is out there in the market in terms of market forces will determine for those persons who are skilled or semi-skilled, what will their rate of pay be. And so therefore, when we're looking at minimum wage, we're looking at persons who are coming at the entry-level, low-skilled jobs, not persons who are coming in semi-skilled or skilled or have university degrees.
So it's a careful balance in Agnes James, a very careful balance in
Yes.
Right. Okay, so that basically is it. We are out of time, but I'll give you an opportunity, both of you, to briefly give any final comments.
The department, sorry, I have worked within the government system for so long, and I have only worked at the Department of Labor, so sometimes the slip of the tongue happens. But the Ministry of Employment and Labor is there to ensure that there is industrial peace and harmony. We work with both employers and workers to to ensure that there's a balance in the world of work.
Thank you, Ian. My final comment or my final words, as I would have alluded to throughout most of my presentations, we are on the campaign trail of awareness. We are bringing more education. So we will continue to our awareness campaigns throughout the Federation, where we want to continually educate our masses as to the importance of safety, whether it's occupational safety, your mental health, your physical health, and well-being. And also the goal is to, have our population prepared for the direction that which we intend to have in terms of new legislations that are to come, as we said, from the Labor Code and what's not. And the whole idea is to enhance our focus on safety and health, and we are grateful for the relationships that we have forged with the business community over the years, and we just hope to keep strengthening those bonds and those relationships, because that's the only how we would get proper buy-in when the legislation comes about under our board.
Unique Giddy and Labour Commissioner Cheryl James, thank you so much for being with us, and we certainly would love to have you back as we speak a bit more about the Labour Code when it is established, hopefully at the end of the year. And of course, the minimum wage, and I know that there are some persons who would hope that it comes before the end of the year. So we certainly would love to have you back at that time.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thank you, viewers and listeners, for being with us for another edition of InFocus. We encourage you to join us next week at the same time, same place for another edition. I'm Ian Richards.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.